The town of Meenweech, shrouded in the mist of night, seemed unchanging in its tranquility. The stars were visible in the sky, and the sound of the leaves on the trees was the only music that broke the silence. However, that stillness was about to disappear due to all the darkness that was heading towards the place. The story begins with John, a man who lived in a house in the outskirts of town, with his wife Sarah and their little son Ethan. The family had chosen Meenweech to escape the hassle and bustle of the city and enjoy a quiet life. But the last few weeks had seen an unsettling change in their home. Sarah had begun to show strange symptoms of discomfort. Her skin had paled, her once radiant eyes were dull, and her voice had lost its sweetness. John, worried about his wife's health, insisted she go to the town doctor. However, each visit to the clinic seemed pointless, as the doctor found nothing out of the ordinary, and defined the symptoms as simple temporary ailments. The man's concern became an obsession as Sarah experienced even greater changes. She began to lose weight rapidly and her appetite completely faded. When they were in bed, nightmares took over, and her eyes filled with terror as she was trapped in terrible dreams. One night, while Sarah was still sleeping in bed, John couldn't help but inspect her abdomen. Carefully, he lifted her pajama top and examined her belly. What he found took his breath away. A strange, hard lump, as if something was growing under her skin. His thoughts were filled with fear and confusion as he observed the mysterious deformity on his wife's body. Would it be cancer? That had to be a tumor, and the worst thing is that it didn't look benign, quite the opposite. Determined to understand what was happening, he began searching the internet for answers. After going through several oncology pages, the description of the symptoms ended up taking him to forums, where several people described the same symptoms in one of their relatives. Nobody offered them help or found a solution. Everything seemed to indicate that they were facing a new unknown disease. The following day, Sarah's little appetite disappeared and a voracious hunger awoke in her. She didn't stop eating. She ate and ate, but nothing satisfied her. She spent the day hungry, and he became frustrated at not being able to fill the emptiness she felt. Fear gripped John more and more as he watched helplessly as Sarah's health deteriorated. The lump in her abdomen continued to grow. They sought help from doctors and specialists in nearby hospitals, but none could offer an explanation for the strange symptoms. The husband's concern reached its peak when one night, while lying next to his wife, he felt something move in her belly. He watched in shock as a lump emerged from Sarah's skin, as if something was trying to force its way from inside. Pregnant? No way! That could not be a baby. He quickly phoned his childhood best friend Emily, who worked as a microbiologist. She was his only hope of discovering the truth behind his wife's transformation. He apologized for disturbing her at that time of night and assured her that he was desperate. Emily, on the other side, was changing her pajamas into jeans and a t-shirt, assuring him that she would leave immediately. In a few hours, she would be in his home. When Emily arrived, she did so in a special waterproof suit. Her body was protected from top to bottom with a type of diver like that of an astronaut, with gloves, boots, hood, mask, and protective glasses. She gave her friend a pair of kids just like hers for him and his son, and asked him to put the little boy in the car. Emily seemed not to be surprised. She showed that she knew what she was facing. John did everything his friend asked. He got dressed, took his little boy out of bed and locked him in the car, assuring him that his mother had a very contagious virus and that he should wait there so they wouldn't all get sick. Afterwards, he returned to his friend. She asked him to stay outside because if that was what she believed, it was going to be something very shocking. She had already called the infectious diseases service, and in no time all the scientific staff would arrive. He asked her for answers. What virus did his wife have? Was he also infected? She looked at him very seriously and said, "This is not a virus, John. It's something much worse. I can't tell you anything. The government wouldn't allow it." He understood less and less. What did the government have to do with all of that? There were normal, ordinary people who lived in the countryside. They didn't even socialize with more than 4 neighbors. They spent their days among enormous plantations and orchards that they themselves took care of. Emily, protected by her biosafety suit, cautiously entered the room where Sarah was sleeping. The first thing she did was inject her with a sedative to make sure she wouldn't wake up and get up. A few minutes later, the infectious disease security services rang at the door, all dressed in their protective suits. They greeted John and he guided them to the room where Emily and his wife were waiting for them. He stayed outside. They did not allow him to stay inside. However, thanks to the fact that they had not left the door completely closed, he was able to see what they were doing through a small space. Unable to understand the situation, his mind was filled with questions and he feared for his wife's safety. Emily examined Sarah carefully. The bulge on her abdomen was clearly visible under the skin. With a worried look and with the approval of the other health workers, Emily took samples of the strange lump and performed a preliminary test on the spot, trying to obtain any clue that could confirm what was happening. Sarah, although unconscious, showed signs of a profound and disturbing transformation. Something was taking control of her body from within. Finally, Emily left the room and approached John, who was eagerly wanting to know what was happening. She explained the seriousness of the situation and how his wife was being consumed. Emily was scared, and her words echoed in John's mind. For several months, they had been obtaining samples of people infected with something they believed to be parasites. At first, they thought it was something similar to worms, like tapeworm, and that they lived in the digestive system of people, feeding on what they ate and creating such exaggerated hunger and extreme thinness. But from the latest studies, they were quite wrong. State intelligence, together with NASA, had detected the infiltration of alien beings. They were quite small in size, similar to 1 or 2-year-old children. To take control of the Earth, they had begun to enter the bodies of various human beings and consume their lives. Through what they ate, their organism became stronger, and little by little, the person who had become a guest lost the will of their actions and feelings until they ended up completely empty. All his intelligence and energy was absorbed by the creature, managing to reproduce. And once it had completed its mission in that body, it left it through the abdomen and entered the body of another person to begin a new reproduction process. John was horrified by the story he was hearing, but something inside him told him that Emily was right. The strange bulge in Sarah's abdomen and her increasingly strange behavior seemed to fit the description of those aliens. "What can we do to stop this?" John asked. Emily sighed deeply. "I don't know, John. We haven't found an effective way to combat these beings. They're highly aggressive and apparently reproduce inside human bodies before moving on to others. What is clear is that we cannot allow this to continue." The specialists finished their examinations and left the room. They turned to John and Emily to inform them that they needed to take Sarah to a high-security facility for further investigation. The husband, despite his concern, nodded. The group of specialists took Sarah to the laboratory, where they continued their test in a controlled environment. The room was surrounded by thick glass that allowed one to observe the interior without risk of a contagion. John looked worriedly at his wife as doctors put her through a series of tests and scans. He begged them to let him in. He needed to be with his wife at all times, but they refused due to the high danger. Finally, after much insistence, they gave in to letting him see the entire procedure through the windows. There he would be safe. John, anxious and desperate, looked through the glass with his heart in his hand as Sarah lay unconscious on the stretcher. One of the specialists grabbed a scalpel and proceeded to make an opening in the woman's abdomen. Suddenly, a scream echoed through the room as one of the doctors staggered and fell to the floor. Surprise and chaos took over the place while the others tried to help their partner. Everything began to fill with blood and John couldn't know what was happening. He pounded on the glass frantically. "Let me in! What's going on with my wife?" Suddenly, he could see it, and what he saw through the glass took his breath away. Two horrible creatures writhed and emerged from Sarah's abdomen. Emily arrived just at that moment and grabbed her friend while also observing in shock and terror what was happening in the room. The doctors in the examination room were struggling to remain calm as they tried to contain the situation. But before they could react, the creatures emerged with frightening violence. The two aliens, grotesque and disgusting looking, broke free from Sarah's body. They had bulbous heads and dark, beady eyes. Their limbs were long and thin, and their bodies were covered in a slimy substance. They attacked the doctors nearby, tearing their groins and scratching their bodies. Horror unleashed in the laboratory as the specialists screamed in panic and pain. The creatures entered the bodies of two of them. John was paralyzed with fear as he watched the men being invaded and controlled by those alien creatures. The other doctors headed to the door to try to escape. But then, Emily reacted urgently and touched the button that locked the doors, preventing them from leaving. The doctors looked at them through the glass, imploring them to let them out. While their two companions contracted on the floor and the creatures devoured them from the inside and took control of their entire bodies. Everything had been filled with blood and screams, but John could only see his wife's open, bleeding body on the stretcher. The vital signs were no longer showing on the screen. She had died. Those creatures had stolen the most valuable thing in his life. Emily grabbed John and dragged him toward the exit. "We have to get out of here now," she exclaimed. "We can't do anything for them. We must escape before it's too late for us too." They ran out of the laboratory and alerted their security guards about the situation inside. The door was sealed and alarms echoed in the hallway. The reproduction of those aliens was multiplying, and Emily knew that they had to find a way to stop it before it was too late. John was in shock, unable to fully process what he had witnessed, but something made him continue forward. He had to help his son. So the first thing they did was go out of the car to look for the little one, and with him in their arms, they returned to the center to find answers. They headed to the central control room. As they examined the records and collected samples, Emily explained more details about the alien invasion to John. A couple of months ago, she had met with Dr. Marcus Reynolds, a renowned ufologist and retired NASA scientist. He shared his strange findings with her. He had been investigating several UFO sightings and reports of unexplained disappearance of people in the region. He had discovered that incidents had increased in recent weeks. His inquiries had taken him to an abandoned cabin on the outskirts where he found evidence that something or someone had been worshipping those aliens for generations. On the walls were carvings and symbols that told the story of the aliens' arrival on Earth and their purpose to replace humanity. The discovery of the abandoned cabin left Dr. Reynolds speechless. The symbols revealed a terrifying story. These aliens had been stalking humanity for generations, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves and take control. Determined to face that threat, the doctor continued his research. To discover more, he established a kind of hidden camp on the outskirts, waiting for an opportunity to confront those beings. One night, while observing the starry sky, he saw a series of blinking lights in formation. A fleet of alien ships slowly descending towards the town. The last thing Emily knew about the doctor was that he was going to notify the government and NASA what was happening. After that, she lost communication with him. Either the aliens had overpowered him, or the government had gotten him out of the way before chaos reigned throughout the population. As Emily continued to review the samples, she told John that although she didn't have enough evidence, she believed that these aliens were vulnerable to certain types of ultraviolet radiation, similar to solar radiation, but in much higher concentrations. In the tests she had performed in her laboratory, she had obtained results where the cells had weakened. The key was finding a way to apply that radiation effectively. They left the control room and headed to the scientific equipment warehouse. While searching, they encountered a group of investigators who had heard the emergency alarm and were looking for an exit. Emily explained the situation and her plan to stop the creatures. Together, they searched for the necessary equipment and gathered it into a cart. Once they had everything they needed, they headed to the area where the creatures were. When they arrived at the sealed laboratory, they saw that the beings had multiplied, leaving all the doctors unconscious. Emily and John entered with a special protective equipment, activated the ultraviolet radiation devices, and began exposing the creatures to the intense light. The aliens reacted with pain and began to weaken, but they weren't going to give up easily. They tried to attack Emily and John, but the two stood their ground, holding the devices. As they fought, Emily noticed that the creatures were especially vulnerable when outside their host bodies. So they guided the radiation devices directly to the doctors to force the creatures out. Once all those beings were weak, the rest of the scientists entered and placed them in glass containers. Emily and John had stopped the alien invasion, at least for now, because they were sure that there were more people with those creatures inside them. The entire town was facing an unknown threat that lurked in every corner. Young people, children, old people, no one was safe. No one could know if their family member or friend was the host of that terror until it was too late. The fight against the alien invasion was far from over, but Emily and John, with the help of scientists and authorities, were determined to find a way to completely eradicate the creatures and protect all their families. Together, they would face an enemy that had been lurking in the shadows for generations, hoping to save the entire world from alien domination. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode!